Welcome to Palo Alto University's new webinar series, At the Forefront of Mental Health. I'm Maureen O'Connor, President of Palo Alto University. PAU, as we're known for short, is dedicated to addressing pressing and emerging issues in the fields of psychology and counseling that meet the needs of today's diverse society. Today's webinar will address how to prevent depression during COVID-19, these challenging times, and will be presented by Ricardo Muñoz, Distinguished Professor of Clinical Psychology at Palo Alto University. Just a couple of housekeeping items. This webinar will be recorded and a link will be sent to you within a week. If you have questions, please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. Let me give a brief introduction of Dr. Muñoz. A longer one would take the entire webinar, so I am really cutting this short. In addition to being a distinguished professor of clinical psychology at PAU, where we're just honored to call him our colleague, he is the founding director of PAU's Institute for International Internet Interventions for Health, I for Health, as we call it, which has as its mission to develop, evaluate, and disseminate digital health interventions worldwide at no charge for all who want to use them. Before coming to PAU, Dr. Muñoz had a distinguished and path-breaking career at the University of California, San Francisco. In response to the mental health challenges resulting from the pandemic, in addition to doing this wonderful webinar for us today, he has taken on two prominent national roles. He is the co-chair of the Executive Committee of the National Institute of Health's Community Engagement Alliance Against COVID-19 Disparities, and he is the chair of the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine's expert panel focusing on web-based tools in English and Spanish to support the well-being of children and families. We are so proud of his leadership at the national level in this response to this pandemic era. He was inducted as a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science for distinguished contributions toward the prevention of major depression and the development of internet interventions to improve mental health worldwide. As you can see, we are so fortunate to have with us today Dr. Ricardo Muñoz. Welcome, Dr. Muñoz.
Thank you very much, Dr. O'Connor. And I want to thank you for the introduction. And also I want to thank you for encouraging the faculty at Palo Alto University to contribute as much as we can to the COVID problem that we're all facing. Today, we will be talking about how to prevent depression during this COVID-19 pandemic. The whole world is affected by COVID, and the stress that we're all feeling is increasing feelings of depression and anxiety worldwide. The most important thing that we all need to be aware of course, is how to protect ourselves and others from the virus. And I want to begin by sharing the CDC's message to wear a mask to save lives, to wash our hands, and to keep a safe distance. Those are very, very important things. Now, I want to begin telling you a little bit about how I got interested in prevention. It's been 50 years since I declared my major in psychology when I was an undergraduate at Stanford. And a couple of years later, I began my Ph.D. training at the University of Oregon in Eugene, Oregon. And the first month I got there, I was 22 years old at the time. I attended a lecture in which a psychologist named Richard Ingraham gave an impassioned talk on what he called primary prevention. In brief, he chided those of us around the room and said to us, you know, we psychologists, counselors, psychiatrists, social workers sit in our offices and we wait until people suffer enough to have to come to see us. we should be going out into the community and sharing what we've learned as mental health professionals in order to prevent the problems that eventually bring these people to our offices. And I was just about to begin my training as a therapist, and this man was telling me that wasn't enough, that we should actually be going out and doing prevention. But I found the message so compelling that from that moment on, I have dedicated about half of my energies to prevention. When I was at San Francisco General Hospital as a professor at the medical school at the University of California, San Francisco, my team and I, my colleagues and I, conducted the first randomized control trial, the first clinical experiment to test whether, in fact, depression could be prevented. And since then, there have been about 50 such experiments, and now we can say that we can prevent depression. Like back in 1984, the National Institute of Mental Health published a paper saying that depression cannot be prevented. And in 2012, I was able to publish a paper with colleagues, Dr. Jan Lakin at Palo Alto University and Dr. Bill Beardsley at Harvard, that was titled Major Depression Can Be Prevented. And I've had the honor of serving on 3 committees of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine that have looked into whether depression can be prevented. And we now are in agreement that the state of the science is such that we now can say that we can prevent depression. However, the last National Academies report, which came out in 2019, stated that we are not implementing this knowledge, and we need to begin doing so. And so this webinar is one of our efforts to try to do that, to try to share what we've learned in terms of preventing depression, and not just waiting until people are so seriously depressed that they actually need treatment. So what we will discuss today is prevention, depression, and the lessons we can use from psychological treatments. We've learned now we have many psychological treatments as well as pharmacotherapy and medication for depression that have been found to be effective. And one of them can be used for prevention. The goal of prevention is to keep people from getting into a serious depression, from crossing threshold into a serious depression. All of us have normal mood and ups and downs, but we could actually prevent from going into a serious depression by doing some of the things that I'll be sharing with you now. And so this is the goal. The goal is not to have to wait until people cross this threshold into what we call a clinical depression or a serious depression. It's also called a major depression, because then treatment is needed to get us back to normal mood. But again, if we can use some of these ideas that I'll be sharing with you now, we hope to help people undergoing stress, and all of us are going through this tremendous stress now with the pandemic, to use some of these methods that have been developed in psychological research so that we don't have to get seriously depressed, and we can do something to bring our mood back up to normal. Now, what happens when we're under stress is that sometimes we get into this downward spiral, like a kind of a vicious cycle, in which the stress brings about poor mood, which then brings about low interest, which brings about doing less and less. And that worsens our mood, and this cycle keeps on going. And what we need to do is to need to break the cycle. Instead of having this downward spiral, this vicious cycle, what we need to do is begin an upward spiral or a virtuous cycle. And one way to do this is to begin to increase our activities, especially our pleasant activities. And as we do that, our mood will improve. We'll begin to have interest in doing things again, which means we'll do more of these, and so on until our mood gets back to a normal level. But what is it that we're trying to prevent? I thought it would be helpful to share with you what the symptoms of major depression are, so that you can recognize them if you begin experiencing them. So the two main symptoms of what's called major depression, and these symptoms have to be present nearly every day for at least 2 weeks in order to be a clinical depression or a major depression. So the first two are being sad, blue, or depressed. That's, of course, obvious. That's what depression is. But there's another one that sometimes people don't realize, which is losing interest or pleasure in things that usually made you feel good. That's another major symptom where people actually say they don't feel depressed, but they just don't have any interest in doing the things that used to make them feel good. The other 7 symptoms are changes in your appetite, either eating too much or too little, gaining a lot of weight or losing a lot of weight. Sleep, the same thing. You can either begin sleeping a lot or not being able to sleep. Insomnia is a very common symptom of depression. The third one of these 7 is feeling restless, kind of moving all the time, or really being slowed down. As you can see, it's a change from your normal state, right? Either eating too much or too little, sleeping too much or too little, moving too much or slowing down. Being tired, no energy, fatigue is another symptom. Then feeling worthless, sinful, or guilty, having trouble concentrating. And the final one is thinking a lot about death, wanting to die, and the most dangerous of all is actually contemplating suicide. Now, if you get to that point, you really need to get help immediately. So where to get professional help? To get treatment for depression or other emotional problems, the first thing to try is to go to your doctor. Your doctor can refer you to a professional who specializes in mental disorders, or your doctor can also prescribe antidepressant medications. It's your choice. You can also go to community mental health centers. And Palo Alto University has a training clinic at the Granowski Center. So if you live near Palo Alto, Los Altos, you can call this number, 650-961-9300, to make an appointment to see someone to obtain psychotherapy. The center also provides services in our Sexual Genders and Identities Clinic. We also have a PTSD trauma clinic and an e-clinic that specializes in doing online therapy, what's called teletherapy. Right? So you don't actually have to come in person to the clinic. That's actually how we're doing most therapy these days because of COVID. We also have a Clínica Latina, which provides services in Spanish. And if you want to make an appointment, the number is 650-417-2037. Again, 650-417-2037. I'll put these numbers up at the end of the talk again, if you haven't been able to write them down. Now, if you're thinking of suicide, there is a National Suicide Prevention Lifeline that's available 24/7. The number is 800-273-8255. Again, 800-273-8255. Or you can call 911, or you can go to the nearest emergency room. Again, if you are afraid that you may actually act on these feelings of committing suicide, this is a real emergency and you need to move on it very quickly. Many suicides occur very quickly. They're not necessarily thought out. Sometimes we get a thought in our mind that just leads us to that. And you need to take care of yourself. It's a real emergency when that happens. Okay, today we're going to be talking again about prevention of depression. Again, we all have mood swings that are normal. So if you watch too many news, you may feel pretty bad after watching an hour of negative news. If you call a friend and whom you haven't seen for a long time, you're going to feel better. Our mood goes up and down depending on what we do, moment to moment. So feelings of anxiety are normal. That's part of being a human being. I like to make this analogy to pain, right? Pain is really important for us. If we don't feel pain, we can hurt ourselves, right? Feeling pain is what keeps you from burning your hand when you get too close to a hot stove, for example. In a similar way, depression and anxiety are very useful feelings because they signal that something is going on in our lives that's not quite right, or there's something happening that's dangerous, which is where you get anxiety, feelings of fear or anxiety. And ideally, these feelings will lead you to change what you're doing so that you can feel better again, right? Just like pain can help you move your hand away from something that could hurt it, right? The problem is, just like with pain, when it is too intense, it lasts longer than necessary, or it happens very frequently. So it's the intensity, the duration, or the frequency of depression, depressive feelings, or anxiety feelings that make depression or anxiety a problem that needs to be either prevented or treated. So again, we all are able to feel negative mood, low mood at times, and high mood at times. The problem is when those mood changes are too large, too intense, they last a long time, or they happen so frequently that they begin to interfere with your life or activities a lot. So for these problems, there is a type of therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy. It's a psychological therapy in which we teach our patients to use our thoughts, our activities, and our context with people to remain emotionally healthy. We help people identify the thoughts that bring them down, the thoughts that help them to be more energized, the activities that again bring them down, or the lack of activities, and the activities that help them feel better. And similarly, the kinds of contacts with other people that either drain them or energize them. And obviously, the whole idea here is to increase the thoughts, activities, and contacts with people that are helpful and to reduce those that are harmful to our health. So this is the cognitive behavioral therapy model. The idea here is that there's an ongoing circle that's going on all the time. Our emotions have an impact on what we do, on our activities, right? They also have an impact on what we think. So if you start feeling bad, say because of COVID, you may stay, in your room all day and not do anything. And you may be thinking, this is never going to end. And that, of course, makes you feel worse. But what we do in cognitive behavioral therapy is we use the fact that thoughts can also influence our emotions, and our activities can influence our emotions. So we begin to identify thoughts and activities that help us feel better, that help us feel healthier. And of course, thoughts affect our activities, and activities affect our thoughts. So for example, if you go to the beach, an activity, your thoughts are going to tend to be much more peaceful, much happier than, say, if you go into a cemetery, right? So these are the ways in which we teach our patients how these thoughts, activities, and emotions are continually affecting each other, and how we can learn to identify those that help us feel better and reduce those that help us feel worse. Now, when I began working at San Francisco General Hospital, I found that a lot of our patients had a lot of problems. I mean, they had health problems, which is why they were at the hospital, but they also had problems in terms of income, of not having jobs, problems with immigration, and so on. Many of them were Black or Latino or Asian, and sometimes they felt the racism or the sexism if they were women, or if they were LGBTQ individuals, they felt the oppression that is felt, in our society for people who are not kind of mainstream people. So I began thinking of this idea of the healthy management of reality. This cognitive behavioral way of thinking can be translated in a way that I think is useful to consider, which is that we all live in two worlds. We live in an internal world, the world of our mind, external world, which is the physical world, beginning with our body and where we live physically, and the people that we interact with. That's our external world. And what I tell my patients or the people who participate in our prevention courses is that we can begin to shape our world in a way that makes it healthier. Because sometimes when we have stress, we react to that stress. We try to manage our stress by doing things that are not very healthy, like smoking or drinking too much alcohol or using other drugs that have a bad impact on our health and are not a healthy way to manage that reality. So the idea of the healthy management of reality is finding ways that can help us to shape our internal and external world in ways that actually make us healthier rather than hurting ourselves. So a lot of the ideas I'm going to be sharing with you today can be found in a number of manuals that we developed at San Francisco General Hospital and which are now available at Palo Alto University's website, at the i4Health website. And you can see the link here. It's i4health.paloaltou.edu. And you can click on the resources tab and you'll be able to get to our manuals. They're available at no charge. Anybody can download them. They're available in English, in Spanish. Some of them are in Japanese, Chinese, Korean. We have one in Greek. And they focus on depression prevention or on treatment of depression. We have a mothers and babies course we developed to try to prevent postpartum depression, which has been found actually to be very effective. It's now suggested that it be routinely given to women who are at risk for depression during pregnancy or postpartum. So these manuals are available, and if you find the ideas I'm going to share with you during this hour of interest, you can go into these manuals and look for similar ideas that I hope will be of help. I'll put this slide up again near the end if you want to write down the website. The manuals, many of them are based on this idea of the healthy management of reality, and I have a short book that's also available at no charge from the manual in English and in Spanish. If you're interested in these ideas, again, you can read more of them in that book. Okay, so one of the things we teach people in terms of the healthy management of reality is that at every moment in our life, we have three choices. If you think of each of these vertical lines as a moment in time, and you think of this one on the left here, the circle on the left as the current moment, now, the present. At any moment, like right now, you have three choices. You can think or do something that will improve your mood, leave it as is, or worsen it. And once you've made that choice, let's say you choose something that improves your mood, at the next moment, you have three choices. You can think or do something that improves your mood, leaves it as is, or worsens it. And throughout the day, you're making these choices. And depending on the choices you make, you may wind up with a relatively good mood, or you can wind up with a depressive mood. So these are choices, and being mindful that you have these choices, that you have this freedom to choose what you do, what you think, and who you interact with, and how you do that, that can have an impact on your mood. Let me give you an example of two women, Violet and Mary. Both of them wake up not feeling like getting up. They're feeling down. They're feeling depressed, perhaps. Now, Violet stays in bed. She's thinking it's going to be another lousy day. But Mary actually gets up and takes a shower. And she's thinking, the water feels good. The warm water feels good. And then the phone rings. And Violet says, I'm not going to answer that. She just doesn't feel like answering that. But Mary does. And it's a friend. Her friend is Nancy. And they begin talking. And eventually they decide that they're going to get together that day. So maybe in the late afternoon, Violet's still in bed, feeling sad. And Mary is with her friend Nancy. Now, of course, these days they would be both wearing masks and they would be 6 feet apart because of COVID. But again, they're spending time getting some sun, getting some exercise, and spending a pleasant time together with somebody they care for. So these are the decisions we make throughout our day that have an impact on how we feel at the end of the day. And if you make these kinds of decisions on a day-to-day basis, of course, they will have an impact on how you feel in the long term. Right? I want to point out that it's not just mood that's changing here. It's not just the mood that Violet and Mary feel. At the end of this day, Violet's body and Mary's body are different, right? I mean, Violet has been in bed all day, no sunlight, probably hasn't eaten. And she's been thinking and thinking and thinking, things that have made her feel worse. Mary, on the other hand, has done some exercise because she's been distracted by some pleasant things that she's done, like taking a shower and going out with a friend. Her thoughts have not been as depressing as Violet's. So their bodies are different. Their bodies are actually different at the end of the day. It's not just mood. These things have an impact on our physical body as well. Okay, so I'm going to now focus on thoughts, then activities, and then people, and how, for example, thoughts can shape our mental reality. If you think of our internal reality, our mind is an environment. Our mind is an environment just like the physical environment. In our mind, there are thoughts, memories, images, things that we like to reflect on that make us feel good, that bring us a sense of energy. But there are also toxic thoughts in there, thoughts that we may have learned from our parents or teachers or people that we were friends with, or maybe our romantic partners who treated us badly. And these thoughts, these memories, our internal world, our mental world is continually being shaped. We begin this process from the time we're very small. Here's an example of how this little girl's internal world, her mental world, is being shaped. Her daughter, her mother is saying to her, "You are such a good girl." And the mother is thinking, "You're so sweet and I love you so much." And by the way she's holding the little girl's hands and so on, she's showing her how much she loves her. And so the little girl's internal reality, her internal world, her mental world is being shaped. And she's thinking, "I am a good girl and my mommy loves me." And so the internal reality of this small person is being shaped by everything, every contact that she has with her mother, her father, her friends, etc., and eventually by her teachers and so on. Right? And this happens throughout our life, and it never stops. I mean, even as you get old, you begin having thoughts as to whether you're still worth something when you're old. I mean, there's a lot of ageism, stereotypes about old people, just like there are about women and minorities and so on. There are these thoughts that come into our mind, and it's important to learn how to recognize the ones that are hurtful and harmful, and the ones that actually help us to deal with life. For example, if you've been called stupid by somebody that was a person of power, you may still have that idea in your mind that you are stupid and that you cannot do certain things that maybe you can do. I mean, this happens to certain kids. Girls are often told that they're not good at math or science. I mean, these are things that happen in our world, and we need to learn how to overcome them, how to help deal with those. So on thoughts. Sometimes when I teach these things to people in our prevention courses or my patients who are depressed, I get the response that, well, thoughts are not really that powerful. Thoughts just kind of come and go. I mean, why should I focus on thoughts? What's the point of that? And so sometimes I have to teach my patients the power of thoughts, the physical impact that thoughts have. So I do this experiment with them, and I welcome you to try it if you like. I tell them, imagine that you have a lemon in your hand, and it's a very acid, tart lemon, right? And you take the lemon and you cut it in half, and then you take the lemon and you bring it to your mouth and you bite it. Imagine biting that lemon. And then I ask, are you feeling saliva in your mouth? And most of the time, people actually are able to feel saliva in their mouth. Now, then I say, there is no lemon. It's just a thought. But that thought has an impact, a physical impact on your body. Now imagine you have thousands of thoughts throughout the day. And those thoughts have an impact on your brain. Yeah, all the electrical impulses, floating around in your brain, the impact that it has on other glands, other parts of your body. There are substances like cortisol levels and so on that are stress hormones that can be triggered by thoughts, right? Sometimes I like to mention this example of a kid who is afraid that there's a monster under his bed, and the father comes in and says, there is no monster under the bed. And the kid says, well, if there is no monster under the bed, how come I'm so scared? Our thoughts can sometimes feel real, even though they are not reacting to any physical reality. Another example that a colleague of mine gave me is, don't paint bears on your windows and then run away screaming. There are ways in which our mind sometimes produces thoughts that produce anxiety and depression and so on, which are really not necessary. And being able to learn what those are is really important. One way to do that is an exercise that's often used in cognitive behavioral therapy called catch it, check it, change it. That refers to when you're feeling, say, depressed. When you're feeling depressed, catch the thought that occurred just before you began feeling depressed. Catch the thought, and then check it. Is it a thought that's helpful to you? And then change it. Let me give you an example. I've lived in San Francisco now for 60 years. And as we all know, there's going to be a big one, a big earthquake sometime, anytime, any second now. I mean, it's true, there's going to be an earthquake sometime. But if I had been feeling anxious about the earthquake for the last 60 years of my life, I would have led a horrible life. I mean, thinking about something, even if it's real, if it's accurate in this case, you catch the thought, there's going to be an earthquake, and then you check it and you think, well, is it necessary or not that I think about this? You say, well, I need to do some things to prevent getting hurt from the earthquake, right? So I got to take anything heavy, away from high places in my house or my office. I need to have some food and water in case we don't have food and water for a few days. We need to do that. There are certain things that are important to do, that are necessary. But once you've done them, the thought that there's going to be an earthquake any second now is not necessary, and it causes unnecessary anxiety. There are thoughts like that we can catch, we can check the thought, and then we can change the thought to see whether the thought is actually helpful or harmful. Some things to consider are, is it accurate? Is it accurate? Is it real? Is it balanced? Right? Sometimes when you have all or nothing thinking, those are not balanced. Like I always fail. Nobody always fails, right? or this is never going to end for COVID. Well, it will end. It's going to take a while, unfortunately, but we will be able to get it under control at some point. And is it necessary to keep on thinking about something? Again, about the earthquake is a good example. And even if it is accurate, is it helpful to keep on thinking about it, right? There are times when you do not need to consider a thought on an ongoing basis. All right. So let me go on here. Let's move on to activities. This idea of shaping now your physical reality. Now, all of us, live somewhere, and that somewhere can have can be a dangerous neighborhood, for example. It can be right now. All of us are aware that there's risk involved in getting together with groups of people. We need to be aware of the physical realities, but to be able to shape those realities, we need to face them. That's why it's so important that we take COVID, the virus, so seriously, that we wear masks whenever we're near other people, that we wash our hands whenever we've been somewhere, where we could have touched something, and that we keep our distance when we get together with people, even outdoors, staying 6 feet away from each other. You can talk 6 feet away, it's no problem, and you can enjoy a company without being any closer than that. Right? So our activities actually provide us with rewards, or what we call in psychology reinforcers for living. Having a nice phone call with a friend is a very pleasant experience, especially if you haven't seen the friend for a long time, right? So the activities that we do on a day-to-day basis that we may not even notice most of the time, like getting up and taking a shower, or brushing your teeth, having something for breakfast. Imagine if you couldn't brush your teeth. There are many things that we do routinely that feel good, make us feel better about life in general. And when those activities go down, our mood goes down. And that's what's happening with COVID. There are so many things that we used to be able to do that we cannot do anymore. Even going to work and seeing our coworkers and so on, we can't do that. We're having meetings using computers and so on, which is something. I'm glad we can do that at least, but we don't have that physical contact that we used to have. We can't even hug our mother or father or our nephews or nieces. I have a small niece right now that's growing really quickly, and I can't get together with her because of COVID. And it feels really bad not to be able to do those things we used to enjoy. One of my professors, Peter Lewinson at the University of Oregon, came up with this idea that we need daily pleasant activities in order to remain healthy in terms of our mood. And I have gotten to think that maybe human beings have a minimum daily requirement of pleasant activities. And when those go down, we start feeling bad. We can even get physically ill. So what's happened with COVID is it's taken away a lot of these pleasant activities. So what we need to do is to replace the things we used to do with new things, or focus more of our attention on things that we could have done back then, but we didn't have to because we could with people in person. So remember the downward spiral that I showed you earlier? The fewer things we do, the worse we feel. And the worse we feel, the more thoughts that are depressing we have, and our mood goes down and we do less and so on. So we need to systematically, mindfully begin doing more pleasant activities. And we need to sprinkle them throughout our day. And ideally, they would be free activities. Activities we can do by ourselves, activities we can do with other people. If we live with other people, we can do things that we all find pleasant. For example, our children now who have to stay home because they can't go to school, for example. They kind of get in the way sometimes. If you have to do work and you have to help the kids with their homework, it can be irritating. And the kids don't like it either. So we need to find ways of sprinkling positive interactions within our day. So maybe having some time in which we play with our child or just have a conversation, not online, not on our smartphones or something, but actually, a conversation with the kids that we live with them. If we don't, then we can do phone calls, we can do online chats, FaceTime, Zoom, whatever, to have contact with people, co-workers perhaps that we'd like to just talk about personal things, not necessarily just work. We can go out and do something in our neighborhood, take a walk, for example, again, wearing masks, staying 6 feet away from each other, but doing things that will increase the number of pleasant activities that we do each day, because most of us are not doing as many of those as we used to do before COVID.
There's a question for you, Dr. Muñoz.
Yes.
Are the approaches the same for people who chronically struggle with major depression and people who might have more context-dependent or short-term major depression?
That's a very good question. The longer and the more intense the depression is, the more that you need more intense therapy and perhaps a combination of antidepressants, medications for depression, and psychotherapy combined. For milder depressions, usually psychotherapy by itself works fine. And the same thing, antidepressants by themselves usually work fine when you have a mild depression or a depression that hasn't lasted very long. The longer and the more intense the depression, the more intense the treatment has to be, and the longer it will take to come back to normal. Okay, so we're talking about activities. This is a picture from one of our manuals that when we are feeling very tired from being depressed, we need to jumpstart our engine. We need to systematically begin doing more pleasant activities in order to begin to feel better, just like you would have to recharge your battery if your car ran down. Okay, so let me move on now to people, shaping our social reality. One of the most important sources of pleasant events are other people. We really do well when we're able to share our life with other people. That's, I think, one of the reasons that so many people are actually risking their lives with COVID by getting together with friends in large groups and so on, because that's something that human beings want to do. The problem is right now we can't do that because we put each other at risk. But the idea of shaping our social reality. Let me give you an example of what we talk about, with our patients. One of the things that we need to do with other people is sometimes deal with problems we have with each other. I remember a patient that was part of a group, a depression group, whom we called the Lady of the Key. This lady had come to live with her adult son and his wife because she had lost her home. And the son and the wife had not given her a key to the apartment they lived in. So this lady, when she would come to our groups, for example, or had to go shopping or something, would have to come and sit on the steps waiting for either her son or the son's wife to come and open the door so she could get into the apartment. And this was obviously causing her a tremendous amount of stress. And she would talk about this, at each of our sessions, our weekly sessions. And we helped her to practice how to be assertive, how to ask for what she needed. And I remember the day that she walked into the group holding a key in her hand, and everybody applauded. She had gone ahead and asked them, I really need a key to the house. I mean, that may seem like such a simple thing for most people, but when you're depressed, you are much more likely to be passive and not be able to ask for what you need. And the problem with that is, of course, things keep on getting worse and worse until sometimes, you blow up, and it makes it much worse than if you were able to be assertive. What we teach people is communication. This will be interpersonal skills. That there are ways of communicating which are passive, where you don't ask for anything, like the lady of the key before she came to our group. There are some people who are very aggressive, and that's not good either, because first of all, people don't like people who are aggressive like that, and you often don't get what you want that way either, or you get it very reluctantly and you make an enemy in the process. And then assertive is in the middle, right? Assertive means respecting your needs and respecting the needs of the other people. And that's an important way of thinking about how you shape your reality, right? That you respect other people, but you ask for respect for yourself and your needs as well. Now, that's very important in the time of COVID, because many of us are kind of stuck at home with our spouses or the other people who live with us, roommates, and with our children too. We don't have that escape valve of school, where they used to go to school, or work, where the spouse went to work and they had time away from each other, which gives you a chance to enjoy each other again. But so when we're together all the time, that can lead to tensions, irritability. Sometimes we get irritated with ourselves, right? So it makes sense that we're going to be irritated with other people as well. And because of COVID, that has increased. So it's really important to begin to share what you need as clearly as possible, so that you can not allow that irritation to increase to the point that where sometimes there has been domestic violence. There's increased domestic violence right now because of COVID. And we need to prevent that as well. One way to think of this is that when there's a problem, sometimes we consider the other person the problem. When we're having trouble with COVID, for example, we may feel that our spouse or our coworkers are the problem. And that does not help us to collaborate and solve the problem. So if you see the problem as something being outside of yourselves, something that you can both work on together, that makes it much more likely that, first of all, that you'll collaborate, that you won't get irritated with each other, but that you'll actually try to do something about the problem itself, rather than attacking each other. Many years ago, when I was still an undergraduate, I read an experiment, a psychology experiment. Psychologists, as you may know, often used to use rats to do experiments. This was an experiment that taught me a lot, however. The psychologist put two rats into a cage that had some electrical wires on the bottom of the cage, and put enough electricity that it was irritating, but it didn't hurt the rats physically, but it was irritating. And what the psychologist observed is that the rats began biting each other. And that experiment has remained with me for all these years. And it reminds me that when there's stress at home, or stress at work, in the office, or stress with friends, that it's like that electrical current, in our cage, if you will. And we need to prevent ourselves from biting each other. I mean, we're already being hurt by COVID. That's kind of like the electrical current. And then if we start taking it out on each other, first of all, it doesn't make any sense to do that, right? I mean, those rats biting each other didn't help at all. They just hurt themselves even more. And that's what we do to ourselves when we react in a similar way. Okay, I'd like to move on to the future past, the idea of the future past, shaping your life yet to come. This is something we teach in the Mothers and Babies course, for example. And let me give you one exercise. Let me share with you an exercise to give you an idea of what I mean by this. In the course, we have a group of women who are pregnant, and they are all learning to manage their mood so they can teach their babies to manage their own mood as the babies grow. Because obviously mood is really important. It colors your life. That's why it's so important to focus, to deal with preventing serious mood problems like serious depression. And so one of the exercises we ask the women to do is the following. We ask the woman to stand up and to just focus on the current moment. The baby is in the womb. You know, she's maybe 6 months pregnant. And once she's focused on that, we ask her to take a step forward, one step. So she takes one step, and then we ask her to imagine being 1 year later. Where is the baby now? So the baby's in her arms. Okay. She focuses on that moment. It's been a year later. Then she takes another step. And this time, the baby is a toddler walking next to her, holding her hand. And then another step, 3 years, 4 years, and 5 years. So after 5 steps, we ask her to turn around and look back at those 5 years. And we ask her to think about what kind of relationship she wants to have with the baby, what kind of bond does she want to have develop with the baby. Does she want the baby to be afraid of her or to enjoy seeing her and see her as a source of pleasant times together? Right? What does she want that baby to be like when the baby goes to kindergarten? Does she want the baby to be afraid of books or to see books as something strange? Or does she want that baby, who is now a 5-year-old, to love books, to be excited when she opens a new book to see what's in there? Right? So the idea is, looking back on those 5 years, you can shape those 5 years that haven't happened yet. Now, our past has a major impact on how we feel now. But we can't change the past that's already passed. We can change the future past, the past that hasn't occurred yet. This is a way of shaping our life. And in terms of COVID, think of yourself a year from now, a year from now. How do you want to remember this year? You want to remember it as a year that was full of limits and frustrations, where you didn't get anything done, a lost year? Or do you want to have some pleasant events in that year that you can remember with joy? My daughter, for example, was going to get married in April, and she had to cancel the wedding ceremony because of COVID. She couldn't have all her guests and so on. And so she decided to postpone it, for a year. And then she said, I don't need to wait another year. Let's just have a small ceremony, and then we can have a party using Zoom where we can dance and so on with all the people we wanted. But let's enjoy this, So she's going to be able to enjoy her wedding dress and so on now, rather than waiting all this time. So there are ways in which we can generate alternatives that will create a past in the next few months that we will be able to remember a year, 2 years from now, and so on, in a way that makes this time a meaningful time. So it's not a lost year. It's not totally wasted. This is what I mean about the future past, shaping your life yet to be. Now, one of the things that's happening, and even without COVID, these things happen, of course, is that we can have family problems, we can have health problems. A lot of people with COVID have lost their jobs. And of course, many people have lost loved ones, right? We have over 220,000 people who have died in the US. If each one of those people had 5 relatives and 5 friends, there are 10 people who are mourning each of those people. That's over 220, over 2,200,000 people, right? Who are mourning the people who died. And then, of course, there are all the people who've survived COVID and are sick still, who are having side effects still from the COVID. I mean, all these things are occurring to our country. The economic losses, all of those things are happening, and those are the things that unbalance us. So in terms of prevention, what we need to be systematically doing is identifying healthy behaviors, healthy thoughts, and people who support us, who do not drain us, and spend more time engaged in those healthy activities, thinking that helps us to be more energetic, and being with people, including via phone or online, who help us to feel more energized and less depressed. That's the idea of changing the future past, so that again, a year, 2 years from now, when this is over, we'll remember this time as not totally lost, but something that we can do. So the final big thought I wanted to share with you is this idea of the practice of the presence of good, on gratitude and kindness, being mindful of the goodness that radiates from others around us, as well as from ourselves. We have a lot to feel stressed out about, but there is still a lot of things that are occurring that we can be grateful for, and that we can be kinder with other people for. Most of us are motivated to be good people. What we would like is to be able to have a sense of caring for each other, for all of us throughout the world. We really need more kindness because the whole world is suffering right now. If we are all mindfully doing more kind acts toward each other, there will be more kindness to go around. And we desperately need that at this time. We need to have a sense of more compassion for each other. One of the things that this idea came from is from a book called The Practice of the Presence of God, which was written by a monk in the Middle Ages, in which he talked about how when he was doing things like scrubbing the floors or peeling potatoes, he used to feel really irritated about doing that until he had the idea that God was with him. And he was in the presence of God all the time, and that somehow made the things he was doing much more meaningful. Now, in my work as San Francisco General, not everybody believes in God. And so I've changed this to say the practice of the presence of good. There is goodness in the world. There's goodness in each of us. And most of us really want to be good to other people as well. And I think by being aware, by practicing that presence of goodness in others around us, as well as in ourselves, that goodness is radiating from them toward us and from us toward them, that goodness is still present even in the midst of COVID. Now, one of the things I want to do before getting on, I'm going to show you some online self-care websites and apps. But before we do that, I want to share with you a practice that can be really helpful in terms of having a sense of inner peace. What we want to create is a sense of awareness of what's occurring and a sense of inner peace so we can deal with what's occurring, so we can be resilient in the middle of this pandemic. I've talked about our three choices. I've talked about shaping our internal and external reality. And I want to talk about managing our consciousness now. We have thoughts going through our mind, and we're doing throughout the day. There's this thing called the stream of consciousness, right? It's like a river of thoughts going and images and memories going through our mind all the time. And sometimes the stream leads us to a bad place. It's like a river that's going down, down into a waterfall. We're gonna get hurt. We could learn to change the direction of that stream, the direction of that river of consciousness. And one of the ways of doing that is something that's called mindfulness meditation. And it's a way of learning how your thoughts are occurring and being able to be aware of your thoughts without changing them necessarily, just being aware of them and allowing them to just flow without judgment and remaining at peace even as you're seeing your thoughts go by, just as though you were looking through a window and there was a bird flying through the window. The thought just comes by, just like the bird flying past the window, and then the next thought comes by and so on, but you are not emotionally moved or emotionally hurt. So I'm going to share with you this video of just ocean waves, and I'm going to lead you through a little example of something called a body scan, which will give you a bit of an idea of how you can change how you're feeling very quickly. So I want you to pay attention to how you're feeling right now, and then pay attention to how you're feeling at the end of this exercise, which I'm going to lead you through now. So what I'd like you to do, it's called a body scan. What I want you to do is, if you want to close your eyes, you can do that. If not, you can just see this video that hopefully is relaxing. And I want you to begin paying attention to your forehead. Pay attention to your forehead. If it feels tight, you can let it be tight, or you can try to relax it if you like. There's no judgment involved here. All you want to do is to feel each part of your body as we go down the entire body. So the forehead, and then down to your eyes and your cheeks, your jaw. Just notice how they're feeling. The back of your neck, your shoulders. Just notice how they're feeling. Again, if there's a knot of tension, just notice that it's there. If you want to, you can relax it. But if you don't, it's not a problem. You're just being aware of where you are at the moment. Then down your arms, all the way down to your hand and your fingers. And notice each of the fingers. Your little finger, you can lead your consciousness to your little finger, your ring finger, your middle finger, your index finger, and your thumb. You can actually direct your stream of consciousness so it focuses only on each of these fingers. Then back up your arms, and then down your back. Just notice what your back feels like, your chest, your stomach, your seat, down your thighs. Pay attention to your knees as you go past them. And your ankles, your feet, your toes, the soles of your feet. And now pay attention to your breathing. Pay attention to your breathing. Notice how your breath goes into your nostril and the air tends to be cooler as it comes in. And then exhale normally. You don't have to force your breathing at all. Just inhale and exhale. Inhale. Hold it for a second. And exhale. And continue breathing like that for a few more breaths. And experience what that feels like. And now, if you've had your eyes closed, I'm going to count backwards from 10 to 1. And when I get to 1, you'll open your eyes. So get ready to get back to being fully aware and awake. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Now, again, pay attention how you felt at the beginning and now at the end. And this can be very helpful. You can do it in a few minutes, and it can help you, again, to reduce anxiety levels and tension in general. So, all right, I'm now going to share some online self-care websites and apps that may be helpful if you want to go more deeply into these things. There's a site called Cyber Guide, hosted by One Mind, a foundation here in California, that has apps and digital health resources that are reviewed by experts. There are thousands of apps out there, and you don't know which one is really good or not. And this site actually reviews them by experts and gives you some ratings as to whether the apps have some research behind them. You can find very many different types of apps on stress, anxiety, mood disorders, and so on. So again, Cyber Guide, very good site. The Veterans Administration National Center for PTSD has developed a large number of apps that are free and are available from myvaapps.com. And they have apps on depression, insomnia. They even have a COVID coach app that I recommend, a CBT app, and so on. So these are well-developed apps by the VA, and again, available at no charge to anyone who would like to use them. The site again is myvaapps.com. And at Palo Alto University, we have the Institute for International Internet Interventions for Health. And in our website, we have what we call the Silicon Valley's digital apothecary. We're just getting this going. We have a research project, you can see there on the left, in which we're asking people, what is it that they think and do that helps them deal with COVID? If you're interested in contributing to this, you can come to our site. Again, just put in Silicon Valley Digital Apothecary and you'll get there. And let us know how you rate thoughts and activities that are helpful or not. We also have an intervention to manage depression and one for the mothers and babies course. The one to manage depression is put together by Dr. Jan Lakin, one of the professors at Palo Alto University. He calls it Better Bet, and Bet stands for Better Behaviors, Emotions, and Thoughts. And it's an 8-lesson depression management course based on CBT. And you can see the link there. It's tiny.ucsf.edu/betterbet. And Dr. Aline Barrera has an online version of the Mothers and Babies course at www.emb.health. See that on the bottom left there. Again, www.emb.health. And she's also conducting a baby text program, which is for pregnant and new mothers, based again on the Mothers and Babies course. To join, you can call 650-433-3833. And the baby text program sends text message tips that teach how to manage maternity-related stress and build healthy relationships with newborn babies. This is the slide I showed earlier on the healthy management of reality. You have the website there. Again, if you go to Silicon Valley Digital Apothecary, you'll get into our website and then you can navigate to resources, and that's where this is, as well as all the other prevention and treatment manuals. You can download them at no charge from our website. Again, to remind you, what we need to do is wear a mask, wash our hands, keep a safe distance. These are practical things we can do to reduce risk for COVID. And if you're already having serious depression, again, contact your doctor, your community mental health center. If you live in Palo Alto or Los Altos, The Gronowski Center, Palo Alto University Gronowski Center, and Clinica Latina are available. Those are the phone numbers. The Gronowski Center, 650-961-9300, and the Clinica Latina, 650-417-2037. And again, if you are thinking of suicide, do call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 911, or go to the nearest emergency room. That's really important if you're at that level, at that severe level of depression. Okay, I believe we have some questions. Dr. Pineda, you'd like to?
So let's see. Everyone can ask questions through the chat, and then I'll read some of your questions. So there's a question that says, when it comes to activities, are there any that are particularly energizing, as far as you are aware?
Activities that are particularly energizing. Physical activities are very helpful. Remember, you can do exercises even inside your own home. Walking, you can walk a mile in about 20-25 minutes. Just start from the door of your home to the farthest room, and then back, and that, back. If you cannot go out, you can do that. But of course, you can go out with wearing a mask and staying away from people. That even is better because you get some fresh air. Unless there's smoke, we had here in California, we had really bad smoke days in which doing it inside the house was really necessary. But physical activities tend to energize you more. I find that when I do physical activities, I can think much more clearly. I get much better ideas for things that I have to do at work and so on. It's like, the blood is coursing through my brain better. It makes me feel better. It energizes me. Activities with other people are really important. Again, those are what makes most of us feel really, really good. Let's see, other things, music and movies that are inspiring, that don't get you down, can be also very helpful. Music that you haven't heard of for a long time, if you can get on that. YouTube has free videos with music on them, so you don't even need to buy an app that's expensive to do this. Things not to do. Notice those two. Do not listen to news all day. That is really deadly. Sometimes when I've been feeling particularly bad, I just stop listening to the news altogether, and just read, maybe on an app or something. Just read the news so I can just keep up with what's going on briefly, but it's under my control. Listening to people talking on the radio or TV for an hour about all the bad things that are happening in the world is just not very helpful to me when I'm feeling bad. So that's something that I really suggest you avoid. I just noticed something from Emily Young here, just something to share. I sometimes find it easier to stop worrying about things that aren't helpful if I schedule a time in the future that I'm allowed to worry about it, like after work. I don't think I usually do return to the worry, and it allows me to give up the worry without thinking that doing so will cause issue. Are the approaches the same for people who chronically struggle? I already responded that part, yes. But that's a good thing. Scheduling worry time is really a good idea. This is something we actually teach. Anything you're worrying about, you probably can't worry about it for 4 hours in a reasonable way, right? I mean, that's just not going to work. Half an hour of focusing on it completely is probably about as much as you can do and still be useful. Just ruminating on the same thing again and again and again for hours just makes you feel bad, and it's probably bad for your physical health too. So scheduling worry time is a technique that I strongly recommend. It really works. And just spend that time, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes max, on what it is that a problem you have to solve. And then if you need to do something beyond that, make a note to yourself to continue doing whatever you need to do. but that's a really good suggestion. Thank you, Emily.
Sure. And there's another question. It says, do you think the risks of group therapy in person are too great right now?
Could you repeat that?
Yes. Do you think the risks of group therapy in person are too great right now?
That's a very good question. If you have a big enough room that everybody can be 6 feet away and everybody's wearing masks, I assume that's probably doable. But most group therapy rooms are not that big, so I would not recommend it unless you have a really large room, an auditorium or something like that. You can do group therapy online too. It's possible to have 10, 12 people do group therapy online. So I think if you don't have a large room where people can be 6 feet away from each other and wear masks, I would be very, very concerned.
Okay, another question is, what are helpful forms of social support during COVID for individuals with depression who are living alone or have an already limited social network?
That's a really good question. Yes. There are support groups out there that you can join online. And you can look for them, and they can be a way of actually getting to meet people who have ideally similar interests or are dealing with similar difficult issues. I myself am part of a men's support group, and we used to meet every week, and we have had to stop meeting every week in person, but we still meet online using Zoom. So there are ways, and these people are not people that are co-workers or were initially friends of mine. I mean, we just met because we wanted to have a place where we could talk without worrying that whatever we said in that group was going to go back into our workspace or our family space with relatives. So we're all strangers to each other. Of course, by now we've gotten to know each other well, but there are these groups, and you can look for them. There are a lot of support groups online. You just find one that is that has interests that are similar to yours.
Thank you. Okay, another question is, if depression comes from different reasons, do we still apply the same method to prevent the depression?
That's a very good question also. You're absolutely right. Depression comes from many reasons. One of the things we know is that depression is more likely to occur when stressful life events occur. They've done studies, epidemiological studies, in which you look at large groups of people and they track their stress level, problems at home, health problems, losing a job, having an accident, stressful events. And they find that the more stressful events that occur, the more likely that a depressive episode is going to occur. So we know stress can trigger depression. And for all of us, of course, it's a little different, right? Some of us can handle more stress than others. We don't know exactly why, but that's the way it is. But there are also biological sources of depression. For example, hypothyroidism can have impact on your mood levels. Diabetes. I mean, there are a number of problems, heart problems, obviously, and the medications that you take for these can increase the likelihood that you become depressed. Again, depending on the medication, depending on what your health problem is. So depression can come out from a lot of different sources. And the question is, can the same methods help? And the answer appears to be yes. They've done studies looking at people who have cardiovascular problems, for example. You randomly assign people to psychological treatments or not, and the people who get the treatments do better. So even if there are some triggers that may be different, treatment methods can help across the board. Now, do they help everybody? That's the next question. And the answer is no. You need to try. If the first one doesn't work for you, do not give up. If the first one does not work for you, try another one. Let's say you go to your primary care physician, you have antidepressants, the antidepressants don't work. They should try another antidepressant, 2 or 3, until you find someone that works. If those don't work, you should try psychological treatment, psychotherapy. The same thing the other way around. You know, if one type of psychotherapy doesn't work, if cognitive behavioral doesn't work, you should look for somebody who does interpersonal psychotherapy or other types of psychotherapy. There are many types of psychotherapies, just as there are many types of antidepressants. And an article just came out a couple of months ago showing that what happens is people give up after 1 or 2 of these, and then they remain depressed. And what they recommend strongly is that you keep on trying until you find something that works. And over 90% of cases of depression can be treated successfully, but not necessarily with the first treatment you try. So that's a really important question. Thank you.
Okay, another question is, how can we advocate for this information and these skills to be more widely taught, especially for people affected not just by COVID-19, but by long-term community trauma?
That's a very good question. Again, these methods we developed at San Francisco General Hospital beginning in the 1980s. And finally, last year, they were, the Mothers and Babies in particular was recognized by the US Preventive Services Task Force. And it's recommended now that these methods be routinely offered to women at risk who are pregnant or postpartum. It's taken a long time to get these things recognized, and they're still not being offered routinely. So our approach at Palo Alto University, at i4Health specifically, is to put these online, make them available to anybody in the world, in Spanish, in English, when we can, other languages, so that people have access to them, even if they have no access to providers who can do this. Prevention of depression services are not available routinely. Treatment of depression is available, but probably not even that, not enough, not adequately. We don't have enough psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, social workers to treat all the people who need treatment. So again, our effort is to put these things online. Not only the websites, but also the manuals. I've mentioned these manuals. You're welcome to download our manuals. There may be ideas there that will be useful to you. And if the website or the manual does not work, seek a counselor, a therapist. That may be needed. Not everybody can do self-help, prevention or treatment for depression. And again, if it's very serious, you definitely will need to have a professional mental health provider. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. So we have 6 minutes left, so we probably can get a couple more questions. Mm-hmm. Okay, resources discuss also help clinical depression and bipolar?
That's a very good question. Yes, the resources do help clinical depression. Bipolar depression is harder to treat without medication because it involves not just the depressive mood, but also what's called manic mood, which is it's a really high level of mood in which people sometimes do things which are very dangerous. For bipolar illness, I would strongly recommend that people work with a physician, a psychiatrist who can prescribe medication. And in addition to that, I think working with a psychologist or using these methods for the depressive part cannot hurt. It's not contraindicated. It should not hurt. But for those high levels of what's called the manic phase, those are much harder to treat psychologically. It is possible to do that. I've seen cases which were treated with psychological interventions where there were fewer manic episodes. But in general, I'd say that using medications for bipolar illness is probably more important.
Okay, and one more question. What about individuals that suffer from chronic pain that coexist with negative feelings, depression? How would you support them to stay active when they physically find it difficult to move?
That is really hard. There are cognitive behavioral treatments for chronic pain, in addition to depression. As with depression, I think you need to try different approaches to chronic pain. But the idea of continuing activity in whatever activity you can support, that you can manage, would be really important. I know that not being active, stopping activity, is usually not indicated for people with pain because it usually keeps the pain going longer. But I think in this case, you would need to work with a physical therapist, who can give you more specific instructions in terms of the specific pain that you're feeling.
Thank you. And do you want to take just one more question, or?
Let's do one more and then.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so how can one prevent worrying about concerns in the middle of the night, scheduling worry time during the day? Do you have other suggestions?
For insomnia, one thing that is recommended is that if you have remained awake for more than 30 minutes and you can't go to sleep, you should get up and go do something until you feel tired again. And then otherwise, the insomnia keeps on getting worse. Another thing I would suggest is have a pad of paper next to your bed. Write down what it is that you're worrying about so that you can remember it the next day, so that you're not worried that you're going to forget continuing to do this. But again, staying in bed when you're ruminating for more than half an hour, let's say, is not a good idea. You should get up and do something else until you feel sleepy and then get back to bed, because you need to train your body to use the bed just for sleeping. Otherwise, insomnia tends to get worse. All right, I think we're out of time. Thank you very much for everybody's joining us. And I wish you all the best during this pandemic. May you prevent depression in your life and that of the people you love.